She was the country girl who owned the city's grandest ballroom, and she was about to make them all pay. Her name was Victoria Clark. She was 31 years old. Born and raised in the small village of Millbridge, nestled in the English countryside, her life had been one of quiet struggle and relentless invisibility. For years, she lived overshadowed by her older brother James, the golden boy of the family, the one who never faltered, the one who earned every accolade and the undivided affection of their parents. Their mother, Evelyn Clark, had a way of looking at Victoria that made her feel like a mere afterthought, while James was the framed masterpiece hanging proudly in the living room. Victoria left Millbridge at 18 with nothing but a battered suitcase, 200 pounds in her pocket, and a stubborn resolve whispered by her late grandmother, "You're worth more than they'll ever see." Tonight, Victoria was stepping into the grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel, the very place that had once been a distant dream. The Monarch was now hers. Every chandelier, every inch of marble, every note of music that floated through the air. But as she crossed the threshold, the words sliced through the floral-scented air like a knife. "Oh, look, the filthy country girl has finally arrived," said Isabella Montgomery, James's fiancée, her voice just loud enough to carry, dripping with disdain. She stood surrounded by her bridesmaids, champagne glass in hand, nails perfectly manicured, a glittering engagement ring that seemed to challenge the chandeliers themselves. Not one of them spared Victoria a glance. They giggled like a pack of silk-clad wolves, steeped in expensive perfume and the certainty that the world was theirs to command. Isabella didn't need to raise her voice. The insult was aimed with surgical precision, meant for Victoria alone, and Victoria knew it. Years ago, she might have shrunk back, drowned herself in silence, found a shadowed corner to disappear. But not tonight. Tonight, she held the power, because 3 years ago, Victoria had signed the deeds to this very hotel. The Monarch was hers. Every silver fork, every tablecloth embroidered with lace, every towering ice sculpture was her kingdom. And before the night was over, that whispered insult would cost Isabella everything she ever wanted. The invitation to this engagement party had arrived at the last minute, an afterthought from her mother, Evelyn, a woman who saw Victoria as nothing more than a minor inconvenience, the failed sibling who never quite measured up next to James. Evelyn's message was clear. It would be nice if Victoria appeared, a social obligation rather than a welcome. The invitation was a trap woven with thinly veiled pity and a desire to display family unity to the Montgomerys. Victoria almost stayed away. But something, perhaps stubborn hope or the craving for recognition, pulled her here. She wanted, even for a moment, to be seen. She parked outside the Monarch's entrance, the familiar scent of freshly baked bread from the village square mixing with the faint hum of the city. Passing through the grand doors, she dressed simply, dark jeans, soft leather boots, her clothes far more valuable than the designer gown Isabella flaunted, but quiet, understated. Real wealth didn't need to shout. Inside, Evelyn presided over her circle of so-called friends, the self-appointed queens of their social sphere, lavishing praise on Isabella and the brilliant future awaiting James. James himself stood by Isabella, grinning like a man who'd won the lottery, blissfully unaware that his ticket was counterfeit. When James finally noticed Victoria, he smiled a sharp, paper-thin smile, one that barely concealed his indifference. He asked if she'd met Isabella yet, praising his fiancée with words that felt rehearsed and hollow. Then, as casually as one might mention the weather, he revealed something that hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. Their mother had given Isabella the heirloom necklace, an ancient gold pendant with a faded sapphire, that their grandmother had promised to Victoria before her passing. Victoria remembered her grandmother's soft hands, the eucalyptus-scented room, the whispered vow that the necklace was for the dreamer, the fighter, who would carve her own way. Her mother had been there, lips pressed tight, yet had handed it over to Isabella as if it were nothing but a trinket. Victoria's breath caught as she saw the necklace gleaming against Isabella's neck, mocking her in its false ownership. The music surged, the lights flashed, and suffocating tension settled over her chest. Excusing herself, Victoria slipped into the service corridor, where she overheard a heated phone call from Hector Montgomery, Isabella's supposed father. His voice was tense, urgent. They needed the wedding to go ahead no matter what. The Montgomerys were drowning in debt, their empire a mirage built on lies and stolen money. They were desperate, a fact Victoria had no intention of letting go unnoticed. She returned to the ballroom, eyes sharp as a hawk, watching the Montgomerys' every twitch. Nervous glances at phones, forced smiles, fidgety hands wrapped tightly around champagne flutes. Isabella's laughter was brittle, her eyes hungry and panicked. The perfect facade was cracking. Victoria's mind raced, the money her family was rumored to have. She was the secret source, sending funds anonymously for years to cover mortgages, medical bills, and living expenses. Her mother had taken credit for James's generosity, blind to the truth that Victoria's sacrifices sustained the family. The Montgomerys were chasing shadows, ready to tear her family apart once their deception unraveled, unless Victoria stopped them. She enlisted her trusted manager, Sebastian, to gather every scrap of dirt on the Montgomerys. Together they uncovered a tangled web of fraud, fake identities, and broken promises stretching across the country. Isabella wasn't who she claimed to be. Her real name was Paula Reyes, a con artist cycling through aliases and locations, building empires on lies. When Isabella confronted Victoria in the hallway, dripping with false sweetness, accusing her of jealousy and desperation, Victoria held her silence, her poker face forged through years of silent battles. Isabella's venom only sharpened Victoria's resolve. Minutes later, Sebastian handed Victoria a folder thick with evidence, financial records, court documents, news clippings, all confirming the Montgomerys' downfall was imminent. The stage was set. At 9 o'clock sharp, as Hector Montgomery raised his glass to toast the future, Victoria triggered the screens behind him. What began as a flicker of technical difficulties became a full exposé. Images of fraud investigations, falsified documents, and the real Paula Reyes flashed before the stunned crowd. The room fell into a stunned hush, broken only by murmurs and gasps. Hector's confident mask melted to panic. Security blocked his escape. Evelyn and Isabella's carefully constructed lies crumbled before eyes that now saw the truth. Victoria stepped forward, commanding silence as Sebastian's voice echoed through the speakers, announcing her as the owner of the Monarch Hotel and the mastermind behind the revelations. The once proud Isabella faltered, her mask shattered, her future evaporating like smoke. James's stunned gaze met Victoria's steady one, a silent acknowledgement of the sister he'd ignored for too long. As police officers entered to arrest the Montgomerys, Victoria held the room's attention with calm authority, delivering the truth in measured tones. The party dissolved into chaos, but for Victoria the night marked a beginning, not just of justice, but of reclaiming her identity. In the quiet aftermath, James found her near the bar, a man emerging from a long nightmare. They spoke honestly for the first time in decades, their fractured bond tentatively mending. Victoria's mother, humbled and broken, confessed her mistakes, tears finally genuine. Forgiveness was not immediate, but a seed was planted. Weeks later, Victoria stood in her office overlooking the London skyline, the heirloom necklace resting warm against her skin, a symbol not of pain, but of triumph. The Montgomerys were behind bars, their empire in ruins, and Victoria had not only saved her family, but paved a future for others like her. At a business breakfast, she welcomed a young scholarship winner from a small village, reminding her that greatness often begins in the shadows of doubt. Victoria smiled quietly, knowing that true power was silent and unyielding. The revenge of the invisible made visible, the quiet storm that no one saw coming. The grand ballroom of the Monarch Hotel shimmered with the gleam of crystal chandeliers and the soft glow of candlelight, but beneath the surface, tension crackled like static. Victoria Clark stood near the entrance, steadying her breath as the words she had just overheard echoed in her mind. Isabella Montgomery's whispered insult, "the filthy country girl," had sliced through the perfume-sweet air, a deliberate jab meant to wound. But it was more than an insult. It was a reminder of how little Victoria was seen, how easily she was dismissed. Her gaze swept the room. The Montgomerys were the picture of opulence, Isabella draped in designer finery, her bridesmaids giggling with practiced charm, and her parents, Hector and Veronica, exuding power and privilege. Yet beneath their polished surfaces, Victoria sensed fragility, a brittleness that no amount of jewels or silk could conceal. She recalled the journey that had brought her here, not just tonight, but the years of struggle that had forged her resolve. Millbridge was a village so small that a traffic jam meant cows wandering onto the main street, and gossip was the currency of the day. Growing up, Victoria was always overshadowed by James, the golden boy who never stumbled, the son who could do no wrong. Their mother's eyes followed James like a spotlight, while Victoria felt like a shadow, an inconvenient mistake. At 12, when Victoria proudly brought home a certificate for winning a local writing competition, her mother barely glanced up from the stove. "That's nice, dear," she said dismissively. Meanwhile, that same week, James scored 2 goals in a school football match, and the house erupted in celebration. Victoria learned early that her achievements were never quite enough, always measured against James's successes and found wanting. So she left Millbridge at 18, clutching a battered suitcase and 200 pounds, determined to carve out a life of her own. The city was a vast, indifferent place where no one knew her name, and she was free to be invisible. For years, she worked cleaning tables in cafes, delivering flyers, folding clothes in shops where faces blurred into anonymity. Nights were spent in a tiny studio flat, walls thin enough to catch the neighbors' arguments and the cry of a baby down the hall. Then came the turning point, a cleaning job at a boutique hotel. The scent of detergent, freshly brewed coffee, and nervous anticipation filled the air on her first day. The uniform was oversized and scratchy, the trolley heavy, and expectations low. No one expected anything from Victoria, and that was exactly what she needed. She watched, listened, learned. How the receptionists handled complaints, how the manager resolved crises, how small touches, a handwritten note, a fresh flower, could turn a guest's day around. Victoria kept meticulous notes during breaks, asked questions when it was safe, and climbed the ranks with quiet determination. From housekeeping to reception, then assistant manager, and finally hotel manager, each step was a battle fought with patience, smarts, and grit. She saved every penny, studied commercial mortgages on late-night bus rides, and bought her first property, a dilapidated roadside motel that others wrote off. She poured herself into transforming it, one room at a time, negotiating fiercely, turning ruin into opportunity. By 30, Victoria owned 3 boutique hotels. Now, at 31, she was CEO of Birchwood Group, a company with 6 boutique hotels along England's east coast. The Monarch was her crowning achievement, its marble floors and glittering chandeliers a testament to years of silent struggle and steadfast resolve. Yet, none of this was known to her family. To them, she was still the little sister who never quite measured up, a ghost in the background while James held the family's spotlight. Evelyn Clark, their mother, never asked about Victoria's accomplishments. She assumed James was the one supporting the family, the responsible son. The bitter irony was thick enough to spread on toast. Tonight's invitation had arrived late, an obligatory email with no subject, and a message from Evelyn urging Victoria to be there. It would be nice. Victoria almost ignored it, but curiosity and a flicker of hope pulled her in. Maybe, just maybe, someone would ask her what she'd done with her life. As she stood at the Monarch's threshold, the very hotel she owned, Victoria felt the weight of every unnoticed year settle on her shoulders. Isabella's voice still echoed, but now it fueled a quiet fire inside her. This wasn't just a party, it was the opening act of a reckoning. And Victoria Clark was ready to claim her place. The evening unfolded with all the extravagance one might expect from Isabella Montgomery's carefully choreographed engagement party. The Monarch Hotel's grand ballroom was a symphony of excess. Towering ice sculptures shaped like swans so delicate they seemed impossible, A three-tiered champagne fountain bubbling luxuriously beneath colored spotlights, and floral arrangements so lush that even the most seasoned botanist might have felt envy. A string quartet filled the air with classical renditions of contemporary pop songs, a curious choice that spoke more to showmanship than genuine taste. Victoria observed it all from a quiet corner, her glass of champagne catching the low light as she measured every detail. Her team had done impeccable work. The tables set perfectly, the waitstaff moving with silent precision, trays flowing from kitchen to guests like clockwork. She took a quiet pride in this, even as the ostentation of Isabella's choices made her eyes roll inwardly. Lace-trimmed napkins, lotus-shaped folds, and every frill designed to impress an audience already convinced of its own importance. Her mother, Evelyn Clark, soon found her. Evelyn approached with the grace of a social queen surveying her realm, but wore an expression that betrayed a hidden distaste. Her eyes flicked over Victoria from head to toe, lingering on the well-worn leather boots as if they were a scandal. "I'm glad you could make it," Evelyn said, voice tight, the word glad strained as if it had been swallowed whole and spat out again. "But why not something more appropriate? The Montgomerys are refined, you know." Victoria replied evenly, "I came straight from work. There wasn't time to change." It was true, though she left out the fact that her work was running a multi-million-pound hotel group. She could have told her mother that her boots cost more than Isabella's entire outfit, or that her tailored jeans were bespoke, but she saw no point in rubbing it in. Evelyn sighed, a long, practiced sound of resignation that had followed Victoria since childhood. "At least try to make a good impression," she murmured before disappearing back into the crowd, leaving Victoria with the familiar sting of being dismissed yet again. The sharp sting wasn't new. It was the same ache that had accompanied every family gathering, every comparison, every silent message that Victoria was less than. But tonight, that sting hardened into resolve. She steadied herself and took a sip of champagne, eyes drifting back to Isabella. Isabella was a master of performance, laughing just a touch too loudly, distributing kisses on cheeks with the precision of a seasoned politician. Every smile was measured, every glance calculated to command attention and admiration. Her parents hovered nearby. Hector, broad-shouldered and confident, his ruddy face a mask of success, and Veronica, slender and immaculate, her jewels catching the light like tiny stars. They moved with the practiced ease of the wealthy, but Victoria sensed cracks beneath the polished veneer, furtive glances at phones, nervous tugs at collars, and a tension in their stiff smiles. Then James found Victoria again, approaching with the same ease he always had. The older brother, accustomed to the center of attention, adjusting his tie as he spoke. "I'm glad you came," he said, though his tone betrayed indifference. "Have you met Isabella? She's amazing. I've never met anyone so sophisticated, elegant, special." His words sounded rehearsed, as if he was reading from a script designed to impress guests. Victoria simply nodded. "I've seen her." She kept the rest of her thoughts to herself, the way Isabella's icy smile barely concealed disdain, the hollow glitter of the ice swans, the way the whole evening felt like a staged play. James scanned the room again, checking who else needed greeting. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he boasted, "Mum gave Isabella the grandmother's necklace as an engagement gift. Isn't that generous?" She loved it, said it had a vintage charm perfect for her. Victoria's breath caught. The necklace, the ancient gold pendant with a faded sapphire that her grandmother had promised to her before she died. She remembered the frail hands, the eucalyptus-scented room, the whispered promise that it was for the dreamer, the fighter. And now it was draped around Isabella's neck, gleaming under the chandeliers, a cruel symbol of everything stolen. The room seemed to close in on Victoria. The music throbbed louder, the lights shifting colors like a nightclub masquerading as a gala. She excused herself, murmuring to James that she needed the restroom, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. In the dimmer corridors behind the scenes, away from the glittering crowd, Victoria's world shifted. Passing the hotel's service entrance, she caught sight of Hector Montgomery pacing anxiously, phone pressed to his ear, face taut with stress. His charm was gone, replaced by a man fighting to hold a crumbling empire together. She overheard snippets of a conversation, words like, "Wedding must go ahead," "Family Clark's money," and "Just hold on until the ceremony." The Montgomerys were desperate, their empire built on shaky foundations and illusions. Tonight's celebration was a mask to hide impending ruin. Victoria's heart pounded. The family she'd silently supported for years, sending money to keep their mortgage payments and medical bills afloat, was a pawn in a dangerous game she hadn't fully understood until now. Evelyn had taken credit for James's supposed generosity, but it was Victoria's quiet sacrifice keeping the household afloat. The Montgomerys believed they had found a golden ticket in James, a way to salvage their sinking fortunes by marrying into Victoria's family. But Victoria held the truth, and the power, to unmask their deception. The game was far from over. The moment Victoria overheard Hector Montgomery's urgent phone call, a seed of cold determination took root deep within her. She returned to the ballroom with eyes sharper than before, scanning the faces of the Montgomerys as though reading the cracks in a fragile vase about to shatter. Every forced smile, every twitch of a hand, every flicker of unease told a story they desperately tried to hide. Hector's fingers gripped his champagne glass so tightly the knuckles whitened. Veronica's fingers nervously toyed with her jewels, as if afraid the sparkle might vanish if she looked away. Isabella's laughter was just a beat too loud, a little too bright. Her eyes darted around the room, hungry and anxious beneath the polished exterior. The perfect fiancé was unraveling, and Victoria watched with a predator's patience. James stood by Isabella's side, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around them. He smiled and nodded at guests, playing the part of the doting fiancé, unaware that the foundation of his future was as unstable as the ice sculptures melting in the warmer air. Victoria's mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't noticed before. Years of anonymous money transfers, the mortgages, the bills, the medical expenses she'd quietly covered, had built the illusion of Clark family wealth. Evelyn, her mother, paraded James as the responsible son, the golden child who supported them all. But James's salary was modest, and the family home was burdened by hidden debts. The Montgomerys had seized on this illusion, believing they were marrying into a fortune that didn't exist. Their desperate plan was to cling to James for security, to ride the wave until their own empire of lies collapsed elsewhere. But Victoria held the key to exposing their deceit, and to protecting her family. She sought out Sebastian, her trusted general in this silent war, who was coordinating the staff with quiet efficiency. Meeting him near the service entrance, she lowered her voice. "I need everything you can find on the Montgomerys, financial records, background checks, anything. Tonight, we expose them." Sebastian didn't ask why. He simply nodded, already pulling out his phone. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving Victoria alone with the weight of what had to be done. Then, as if summoned by the tension in the air, Isabella appeared beside Victoria like a specter, her designer dress brushing softly against the marble floor. Her smile was saccharine sweet, the kind that concealed a blade. "Shall we have a chat, just the two of us?" she said, voice dripping with false warmth. She took Victoria's arm with an intimacy that felt like a trap. They slipped into a quieter corner near the restrooms, the noise of the party muffled but still pulsing in the background. As soon as they were out of earshot, Isabella's mask dropped. "I know all about you," she whispered, eyes glittering. "I know you send money to your family, trying to buy their love from a distance. Why would someone barely scraping by send money to people who don't want her?" Victoria's jaw tightened, but her expression remained unreadable. A poker face honed through years of silent battles. Isabella's words were meant to wound, to belittle. "Maybe I just care," Victoria said softly. "Even if no one else does." Isabella leaned in, voice low and venomous. "James tells me everything. He says you're jealous, that you'll always be the unwanted sister. The family tolerates you out of pity, not love. You're a dead weight, Victoria. "No one will miss you." The words were knives, but Victoria refused to flinch. Instead, she smiled calmly. "Isn't it funny how people who know the least think they know the most?" Isabella's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Victoria could see the cracks widening in her carefully constructed facade. As Isabella stormed away, furious and unmasked, Sebastian returned, his face pale and tense. He handed Victoria a thick folder bursting with documents, financial statements, court records, news clippings, all pointing to a web of fraud and deception at the heart of the Montgomery Empire. Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. The Montgomerys were not just bankrupt. They were running a Ponzi scheme, their wealth a mirage built on stolen investments and broken promises. Their desperate hope was that marrying into the Clark family would buy them time and cover their tracks. The wedding wasn't a celebration of love. It was a calculated move in a failing con. Victoria folded the papers with quiet resolve. The time for silence was over. The night was far from finished, and the reckoning was about to begin. The ballroom's glittering surface masked a simmering storm as Victoria clutched the folder tight, her mind racing through the damning evidence she now possessed. The Montgomerys' empire was crumbling, and she held the keys to their undoing. Yet, the weight of the moment pressed down on her chest, not just the thrill of revenge, but the burden of responsibility toward the family she had long been estranged from. The music pulsed in the background, a relentless heartbeat that mirrored her own rising tension. She slipped quietly to a secluded corner, away from prying eyes, and let herself breathe for a moment. The world she had built from nothing, the hotels, the company, the respect she'd earned in boardrooms, had prepared her for battles exactly like this. But no amount of business savvy could soften the sharp sting of betrayal and humiliation she had just endured. Her thoughts turned inward, unraveling the tangled web of emotions. Shock at Isabella's cruel words, the bitter sting of her mother's dismissive glance, the years of invisibility that had shaped her very identity. She remembered the girl who had left Millbridge with nothing but stubbornness and dreams, the invisible sister who had always been told she didn't belong. But beneath the hurt, a fierce flame kindled, anger, yes, but also clarity. Victoria saw now that silence had only empowered those who underestimated her. The time had come to stop shrinking, to stop hiding in the shadows. The quiet patience she had cultivated was her greatest weapon, and tonight it would cut deeper than any shouted confrontation. She thought of the countless meetings where men in tailored suits had dismissed her ideas, smiled patronizingly, and thought her too soft or inexperienced. How she had smiled back, waited, gathered information, and struck when they least expected it. This was no different. Victoria's resolve crystallized. She would expose the Montgomerys, not with noise or spectacle, but with the undeniable power of truth. She would protect her family, reclaim her heritage, and ensure that those who scorned her paid the price for their arrogance. Her phone buzzed, a message from Sebastian. "I have what you asked. Ready when you are." A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. The stage was set, the evidence was real, the moment had come. Victoria straightened her shoulders and stepped back into the ballroom. The opulent crowd continued their festivities, oblivious to the storm gathering in their midst. James laughed, still unaware that his future was about to unravel. Isabella's forced smiles had begun to crack, revealing flashes of desperation. Victoria's eyes met James's across the room. For decades she had been invisible to him, a shadow lurking on the periphery of his perfect life. Tonight, she would step into the light and make sure he could no longer ignore her. The first act of quiet revenge was about to begin. Victoria stood amidst the swirling crowd, her calm exterior belying the storm raging inside. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the soft murmur of polite conversation all blurred into background noise as her thoughts circled relentlessly. She replayed Isabella's cutting words, the way her fiancé had bared her teeth with cruel satisfaction, certain that Victoria was nothing but a desperate, failed sister clinging to scraps. The humiliation stung sharper than she expected, but beneath it simmered a deeper pain. The betrayal of a family that had long refused to see her worth. In that moment, Victoria felt the full weight of years spent living in the shadows. She was the invisible sister, the one who never quite fitted in, whose successes were overlooked and whose presence was tolerated only out of obligation. Her mother's cold glance earlier, the subtle sneer disguised as concern, echoed in her mind, a reminder that no matter how far she rose, some walls remained unbroken. But as the initial shock faded, a quiet fire kindled within her. This was not the time for tears or retreat. It was the moment for resolve, for silent strength. She had endured the comparisons, the dismissals, the whispered judgments. Now she would harness that pain, that anger, and turn it into her greatest weapon, patience and precision. Victoria reflected on the years she had spent building her empire from the ground up, the countless hours of hard work behind closed doors while others took the credit. She thought of the meetings where she was underestimated, the deals she closed while men talked over her, the nights spent poring over spreadsheets and contracts when others were out celebrating. Through it all, she had learned the power of silence, the way it could lull adversaries into complacency before the decisive strike. Her gaze swept the room again, noting the subtle signs of unease among the Montgomerys, the tight grip on champagne flutes, the fleeting glances at their phones, the forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They were hiding something, and Victoria knew exactly what. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. A message from Sebastian. "Got the files. Ready to move when you say." A calm confidence settled over her. The moment to act was near. She would expose the truth quietly but unmistakably, letting the evidence speak louder than any confrontation. This was her reckoning, a long-awaited justice not shouted from the rooftops, but delivered with the steady hand of someone who had waited and prepared. Victoria took a slow breath, steadying her nerves. The night was far from over, and soon the room filled with laughter and false glamour would be silenced by the undeniable truth. She would no longer be the invisible sister, the forgotten daughter. Tonight she would reclaim her name, and nothing would ever be the same again. Just as the evening seemed to settle back into its rhythm of polite chatter and clinking glasses, Victoria received an unexpected message that shifted everything. Sebastian, her trusted manager and confidant, appeared discreetly by her side, holding a folder and a small USB stick. The evidence they had gathered on the Montgomerys was ready, comprehensive, damning, and undeniable. But what truly caught Victoria's attention was an additional revelation buried deep within the documents, a pattern of identical fraud schemes linked to the Montgomery name in another part of the country, dating back several years. The name Isabella was just a mask. Her real identity was Paula Reyes, a seasoned con artist who, along with the Montgomerys who posed as her parents, had been weaving a web of deception for over a decade. They had been moving from town to town, changing names and stories, building fake empires on the backs of innocent investors and trusting families. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. This was no ordinary family scandal. It was a long-running criminal enterprise, expertly disguised beneath layers of wealth and status. And now, it was all within her grasp. Sebastian whispered, "This changes everything. They're not just desperate, they're dangerous. And their plan to marry into your family? It's a calculated move to escape the fallout." Victoria nodded slowly, the pieces clicking into place. The engagement party was more than a social event. It was a strategic step in their escape plan, a way to anchor themselves to a seemingly stable family and gain access to hidden assets. This knowledge was power, but it also meant the stakes were higher than she had imagined. There was no room for error, no space for hesitation. She pocketed the USB and the folder, feeling the weight of responsibility settle solidly on her shoulders. For years she had been invisible, underestimated, and dismissed. Tonight, she had the chance not only to reveal the truth, but to protect the family she had silently supported all along. Victoria's mind raced ahead, formulating a plan that would expose the Montgomerys' lies and shield her own from the impending fallout. The quiet revenge she had envisioned was now a complex dance of timing, precision, and courage. As the music swelled once more and the guests resumed their celebrations, Victoria felt a new sense of clarity. The game had changed, and she was ready to play and win on her own terms. The curtain was about to rise on the most dramatic act of her life. Armed with the explosive evidence, Victoria moved swiftly but deliberately. In the dim glow of the service corridor, she handed the USB and folder to Sebastian, whose sharp eyes reflected the gravity of the moment. "We need everything ready for the 9 o'clock toast," she instructed softly. "When Hector raises his glass, I want the truth to be unavoidable." Sebastian nodded without hesitation, already making calls to discreetly prepare the audiovisual team. The plan was simple in its precision: transform the grand ballroom screens into a stage for revelation, projecting the Montgomerys' web of deceit for all to see. Victoria took a deep breath, feeling the familiar rush of power that came with control. The years spent climbing the ladder of a male-dominated industry had taught her to wait for the perfect moment, to strike quietly but decisively. Tonight was no different. As the clock edged closer to 9, the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Guests smoothed their gowns and polished their glasses, unaware that the evening was about to turn from celebration to catastrophe. Victoria found a vantage point near the back of the room, partially hidden behind a towering floral arrangement. From here, she could watch everything: the Montgomerys' brittle smiles, the confident yet strained facade of Hector as he prepared to speak, James's eager but distracted gaze, and Isabella's forced composure beginning to crack. Her phone buzzed again. Renata, her lawyer, confirming that the federal investigation was active and that the authorities were en route, ready to move the moment the evidence became public. The timing had to be perfect. Victoria's heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. This was the culmination of years of silent struggle, the moment when the invisible sister would no longer be ignored. As Hector stepped onto the small stage, microphone in hand, the music faded to a low murmur. Glasses lifted in unison, and all eyes turned toward him. Victoria exchanged a brief glance with Sebastian, an unspoken signal, and then, with a steady hand, pressed the button that would change everything. The screens flickered, and what first appeared to be a technical glitch transformed into a relentless cascade of images and documents: official investigations, financial records, news reports detailing Ponzi schemes, and photographs linking Isabella to past frauds under another name. The room froze. Smiles faltered. Conversations died mid-word. Victoria watched as the Montgomerys' carefully constructed world began to unravel, piece by devastating piece. The reckoning had begun, and there was no turning back. The grand ballroom plunged into stunned silence as the screens behind Hector Montgomery burst to life, displaying a relentless stream of damning evidence. The once celebratory images of Isabella and James, smiling at restaurants, walking along sunlit beaches, sharing cotton candy at fairs, froze mid-smile, replaced by irrefutable proof of deceit. Court documents, financial reports revealing fraudulent schemes, and news clippings exposing collapsed ventures that had left countless victims ruined. Hector's face drained of color, his confident mask shattered as eyes across the room locked onto the unfolding nightmare. Veronica clutched her necklace nervously, her elegant composure dissolving into panic. Isabella stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, her hand trembling as she clutched the heirloom necklace, Victoria's grandmother's pendant, now a cruel symbol of betrayal. James's gaze flicked between Isabella and the screens, confusion and dawning horror battling within him. The stories he had been told, the future he had envisioned, all crumbled in an instant. The murmurs swelled into whispers, then gasps, as guests watched the truth lay bare before them. Some lowered their glasses, unwilling to toast a family built on lies. Others drew out their phones, capturing the moment that would become headline news. Hector's voice faltered as he tried to regain control, insisting the documents were mistakes, errors in the system. He shouted for the technicians to shut down the display, but the images shifted relentlessly, each slide a blow to his credibility. 2 security guards stepped forward, blocking Hector's path as he stumbled off the stage, desperate to escape the fallout. Veronica clung to his arm, whispering frantic reassurances that fell on deaf ears. Victoria stepped forward, her boots echoing softly on the marble floor as she crossed the room. All eyes turned to her, the country girl, the invisible sister, the dead weight. But now she was the owner of the Monarch Hotel, the woman who held the truth in her hands. Sebastian's voice resonated through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Victoria Clark, owner of this hotel and CEO of Birchwood Group." The crowd fell into a stunned hush. Victoria took the microphone from Hector's trembling grasp and addressed the room with calm authority. "Good evening. I apologize for the interruption, but I believe you deserve to know exactly who you're celebrating tonight. Hector and Veronica Montgomery are not who they claim to be. Their empire is a house of cards built on fraud and deception. Isabella Montgomery is, in fact, Paula Reyes, a con artist who has been running this same scheme under different names for over a decade." Her voice was steady, each word landing like a hammer. "The necklace you see on Isabella is a family heirloom, promised to me by my grandmother, but given away without my knowledge. Tonight the truth can no longer be hidden." Isabella's mask shattered completely, her voice breaking as she accused Victoria of lies and jealousy. But the room was no longer listening. The evidence was undeniable, and the authorities arrived moments later, stepping through the doors with quiet resolve. As officers moved to arrest the Montgomerys, Isabella screamed threats and promises of revenge. Her designer gown rumpled, her carefully crafted life collapsing at her feet. Victoria watched, a complex mix of triumph and exhaustion washing over her. The night's events had been years in the making, a quiet, patient revenge that no one saw coming, but everyone would remember. The engagement party was over. The reckoning had begun. The aftermath of the storm was a muted chaos. Guests whispered among themselves, some lingering in disbelief, others slipping away quietly, unwilling to witness the fall of a family they'd admired or envied. The once vibrant ballroom lost its shimmer, the ice sculptures melting into puddles, the champagne fountain's bubbles slowing to a faint fizz. The night that had promised celebration now marked a reckoning. Victoria stood tall amidst the shifting crowd, the weight of victory tempered by the exhaustion that seeped into her bones. Her mother, Evelyn, looked smaller somehow, her usual poise replaced by a fragile tremble. She approached slowly, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I never knew," she whispered, voice cracking. I thought you—" Victoria met her mother's gaze steadily. "I was the one sending money all these years. I was the one keeping this family afloat. You never asked, and I stopped expecting you to." Evelyn's tears spilled freely now, genuine and raw. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry, Victoria." The apology hung in the air, heavy but honest. Forgiveness wouldn't come overnight, but the first cracks had formed. Then James appeared, his expression a mixture of remorse and awe. "I never saw you, not really. I thought I knew our family, but I was wrong. Maybe it's time we start again." Victoria nodded, a fragile hope blooming amidst the wreckage. "We have a lot to rebuild." Days later, the media frenzy settled into a steady hum. Headlines blared the scandal, some twisted the story, others lauded Victoria's quiet strength. One tabloid even dubbed her the country girl who owned the ball, a title she clipped and framed in her office, a reminder that labels can be reclaimed and rewritten. In her corner office overlooking the city skyline, Victoria held the heirloom necklace, its weight familiar and comforting against her skin. It was no longer a symbol of loss, but of perseverance and triumph. A knock at the door broke her reverie. A young woman entered nervously. Noelle, the recipient of the Birchwood Group scholarship, fresh from a small village much like Millbridge, eyes bright with hope and determination. Victoria smiled warmly, extending her hand. "Welcome, Noelle. Let's get to work." As the city hummed below, Victoria Clark, once the overlooked sister, now stood as a beacon of resilience and quiet power. The night of reckoning had passed, but her story, the story of the girl who refused to be invisible, was only just beginning.